online. Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the Book of Mark. We're in chapter 10. It's also an episode of what is going on with Julia's hair. We don't know. But anyway, so we're going to be in 10. 10's a pretty meaty passage. And online folk, you may find that I say something that is different from what you've heard in the past, and it may actually offend you, and that was not my goal. But if you have questions, put them in the comments or send me a private message. And as I was telling the ladies here, this is not something I feel like I'm accomplished in my studying. I don't feel like I've totally finished my studying of this passage, but I was so excited because I saw God showing me, hey, look what you've always believed before in the past, but I'm showing you what my word says. And so that was exciting. So again, I am going to say some things because we're talking about marriage and divorce. This is chapter 10, and those are tough topics. And marriage is very plainly defined in the Bible. Divorce, it has a little bit of more digging to when is a divorce okay? And does God want us to get divorced? Well, that's an easy question to answer. No. But he knows that divorce is going to happen. So let's just all walk tenderly through this passage, not upsetting anyone. Okay, so I'm going to read. I think I would like to just read verses 1 through 12 for right now. And that's the section that does deal with divorce and marriage. Okay. Now, this is not the only part of the Bible that gives us information about divorce and marriage. Just by the way, in case you didn't know that. All right, verse 1, chapter 10. And he arose from thence, and cometh into the coast of Judea by the farther side of Jordan, and the people resort unto him again, and he was wont, he taught them again. So as he tends to do, okay? And the Pharisees came to him and asked him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife, tempting him? Now, the wife is not tempting the husband. This was the Pharisees tempting Jesus with the question, okay? And he answered and said unto them, what did Moses command you? And they said, Moses suffered to write a bill of divorcement and to put her away. And Jesus answered and said unto them, for the hardness of your heart, he wrote you this precept. But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. And in the house, his disciples asked him again of the same matter. That's one of those verses I never had paid attention to. And he saith unto them, whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another committeth adultery against her. And if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she committeth adultery. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff there. But first of all, let's do a location recap, a little location review. So after the transfiguration, okay, they had gone to Capernaum. And then that's when Jesus talked about having salt within yourself and peace with one another, which is preparing them to go deal with these Pharisees, right? And then he went to, now they're, excuse me, they're in Judea by the farther side of Jordan, we see in verse 1. Now, one Bible scholar was talking about how that was the region that Herod Antipas, whatever, which he ruled that area, which would maybe explain, this is just opinion, maybe that's why the Pharisees were asking about marriage and divorce, because remember, Herod was married to his brother's wife, and when John the Baptist called him out on it, okay, eventually that's what happened. But John the Baptist got imprisoned for preaching the truth and saying you shouldn't be married to your brother's wife. And then the wife, Herodia, which I'm like, don't y'all get tired of that name base? I mean, anyway, um, she, being the lovely woman she was, encouraged her young daughter to ask for the head of John the Baptist after her pleasing, after her dancing pleased her um stepdaddy slash uncle. That's very white trashy bloodlines there. So redneck, Appalachian, whatever you want to say. Okay, we all know those people groups that we're not real proud of. Okay, that's tacky. But anyway, so then so John the Baptist was beheaded, and that make not I'd never thought about that in that context. That was the area where they are doing this talking, and the Pharisees. Okay, now I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just stop for a second. All right, so they're asking a question, and it says, and it came they asked him, but this is more than just asking a question. They are trying to entrap him. All right, so don't be scared to approach God with your questions, because part of me, one of the first things that popped in my head is like, I wonder if people might wonder if God's saying not to approach him with questions. But no, he tells us in more, like, let's go to um James 1:5. James is New Testament. James 1:5. One of my favorite verses, y'all. And it says, if any of you lack wisdom, which I do on a daily basis, hourly, minutely, anyway. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Now, remember when we studied Book of James, we learned that this upbraideth not means he doesn't like, girl, you have to ask that again. You have to ask for that wisdom. What's wrong with you? He doesn't do that. He doesn't berate you. He doesn't scold you. He's going to give it to you. And remember, liberally means generously. We use that word differently most of the time today, but liberally means abundantly, generously. So he's going to give it the wisdom. So obviously he doesn't mind if you have a question, because it says if any of you lack wisdom. He understands that we don't know everything and that we're going to have to ask. Okay, and I just do love that. But wait a minute, Julia, you're saying abradeth not means he wasn't giving them a hard time about that. He's not going to give a hard time about asking for wisdom, and he's clearly giving the Pharisees a hard time. That's because he knows their hearts. All right, he knows their hearts, and he knows what they're trying to do. Okay, he knows that they're just trying to trick him. There's so much more to this. If he says blah, then they'll say, well, that means you say blah blah. And if he says blah blah, then they're going to say, well, that means you say blah. They're just looking for ways to discredit him. Remember, they walked or got in a cart. I don't care. I don't know what maybe they have a cart because they're Pharisees. But either way, that's a distance of about 70 miles and not in a car like we have. So they're bound and determined to be a problem, which just, wow. Anyway, so we do know that God is okay with us asking questions, and he's promised to answer us. Look at Jeremiah 33. That's Old Testament. And I go look for the page number because I get to Jeremiah's after Isaiah somewhere. You like it? Yeah. We're going to go to Jeremiah 33:3. And we're already hearing that it's a fave of one of our people here. Online Focus. Is it a favorite of yours? Because it says this: call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. It doesn't say, call unto me, and I might answer you. Call unto me, and I'll kind of answer you. It's a very big promise from the Lord. I will answer thee. And I'm sure everybody in here has a story of that you were praying about something that you weren't sure about, didn't know about, needed guidance on, and the Lord answered you. Maybe not in a mighty way, like the parting of the Red Sea, but he answered you. He never breaks his promises, which is so good, but not good if you're not saved, because he will, the promise of wrath coming, he's not breaking that. That's going to come. All right. So another one I like is Proverbs 2, 1 through 6, Proverbs after Psalms. Sorry, the throat is ugh. All right. I'm going to be doing 1 through 6 because I liked more than just the one verse I found in my research. My son, if thou wilt receive my words, huge right there. Will I listen to him? You know how we feel when we're telling someone something, especially if they've asked us for help and then they just don't even okay, anyway. And hide my commandments with thee, so that thou incline thy ear unto wisdom and apply thine heart to understanding. Yea, if thou criest after knowledge and liftest up thy voice for understanding, if thou seekest wisdom as silver and searchest for her as for hid treasures, then thou shalt understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh the knowledge and understanding. He's so good. He is knowledge. He is wisdom. He's the creator. There's no way there's going to be nothing he can't understand or doesn't know and didn't know the answer 4 years ago. I mean, just all this stuff. It's amazing. But these promises are so wonderful. Now, in verse 2, we're back to Mark 10, verse 2. These Pharisees, right? There's so much more going on in here. So, divorce was an extremely controversial topic back then, as it can be today amongst believers. Now, amongst the Jews, and I'm going to differentiate there for right there, the Jews that we know of the culture of that time, probably some of them are not saved yet or whatever, but in the Jewish customs and whatever, this was just so touchy of a subject that really, no matter what answer Jesus gives, it's gonna upset somebody. Okay. And this is touchy because if there's a crowd around Jesus right now, remember, there's a crowd around him. And if they can get somebody in this crowd excited and upset, well, then maybe they have an excuse to arrest Jesus. He's causing unrest. He's causing a problem. So part of the reason for them asking this question is, in my opinion, to incite a disruption, a protest, or maybe even violence. They're literally up to no good in any of this. None of these guys are actually asking this to gain wisdom. And we do know some Pharisees got saved. So, but this group, no, doesn't look like it. Okay. So back in that time, I did some research, and the Jewish culture and community had two different um, prevailing views. I'm sure there's lots of different views. And you know how it is in any group of people. A lot of us will come up with our own little theory of what something's supposed to mean so it can suit our own needs. And I'm sure they had done that too. But there were two main schools of thought in the Jewish culture. And one, it was dependent on who they followed. And they're basing their learning on Deuteronomy 24. So let's head over there, Old Testament time. Deuteronomy 24. Who did God use to pen Deuteronomy? Moses. All right. When a man hath taken a wife, this is verse 1, and married her, and it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he hath found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it in her hand and send her out of his house. Deuteronomy 24. So, as you can see, this is pretty one-sided. Could a wife divorce a husband? No, not at this time.
Did you look up, like, is there something you can look up to study what they considered uncleanness?
We're getting there. Why? Do you want to share something? Go ahead. So the term uncleanness had led to some being subjective to what people were thinking it meant. And if you notice here, because we're just real quickly here, notice that the woman could not do anything here. She had no say in this. Now, back in the New Testament time in the culture, the hey Jammer, the conditions were still the same. The women did not have the right to divorce the man. However, Roman women did. Okay, so maybe I just want us to keep that in mind. But the uncleanness, it depended on what that meant by who you followed. Some people followed a rabbi named Hillel, whatever. You know, I'm going to mispronounce it. And another was a rabbi Shammai. And they had two very completely different of the thoughts of what this meant. So the followers of Rabbi H, because I can't pronounce it, this was very open to interpretation. Uncleanness is anything the husband wants to call it. She burnt my food. They literally used that as an excuse, as an example. She burnt his food and he was able to divorce her. So if that school of thought, remember, it's a prevailing school of thought, meaning it's a pretty prominent thinking. What protection was that for women? None. What could women do if they were divorced? Did they have jobs and things? This is really not good for women. So they were permitted to divorce his wife for any reason, not of God. First of all, and we're going to learn about why did God even allow for divorce anyway. But this is not how God set up marriage at all. Now, the other school of thought, Rabbi S., this was much more stringent. And I would find, if I were in that time and period, I would be under Rabbi S's teachings. I can guarantee you. I know my personality. But to me, from what I see, his seemed to be more in a line of what God was intending. But I don't know if he was all the way a good teacher or not, but he was very, very strict. And he taught that the word some uncleanness referred only to premarital sin. Okay. If a newly married husband discovered that his wife was not a virgin, then he could put her away, was the term. Who else tried to put someone away privately? Joseph, right? Because he thought maybe she had. Remember, they were betrothed, but they had, and which is a very contractual thing, but they were not all the way finished with the marriage process. And here she is pregnant. So that would have been like, he would have been justified to put her away. Well, some people are like, but what about adultery? And we're going to get to that. I was afraid of this. My thoughts are all over the place, and I've made these very laid out, and I'm still getting all because it's just like so much, right? So, this is where I don't know if these Pharisees were of Rabbi H. Probably. They're pretty full of themselves. Big opinion there. I can't prove it. Or Rabbi S. I could also see them being Rabbi S because very stringent, and the Pharisees love all the legalism and the legalities, right? But notice it said premarital sin. Adultery would be after marriage. Notice Jesus is not addressing, when we finish this passage, you're going to see he's not addressing adultery within a marriage. Okay. So, as usual, Jesus ignored what they were trying to do and went forward. But let me just tell you about their response to him. Look at verses 3 and 4. And he answered and said unto them, what did Moses command you? There's so much more significance to that than I ever dreamed of. Jesus, Son of God, part of the Trinity. Now, I don't know who all there in that area that day recognized who he was, but we know, looking back, that was Jesus, Son of God, part of God, him saying, "What did Moses command you?" The reason why that's big is turn to Matthew 5:17. I think I told you the right reference. That vent is loud. Anyway, Matthew 5:17. Oh, and he says, this is Jesus talking, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." So Jesus saying, what did Moses tell you? Shows you he supports the law. He's not here to destroy it. He's actually going to fulfill it. And the law is supposed to show you how you can't do anything of it of your own. You need him, right? So I like that that was just like kind of subtle in there. He just, what did Moses tell you? And what law are they talking about? The one we talked about in Deuteronomy 24. Okay. And so back to Mark 10. Flippy. Okay. And Jesus answered and said to them, well, they said, well, Moses was allowed to write a bill of divorcement. And they're like, ha ha ha. We got proof that, divorce can happen, blah, blah, blah. Well, and Jesus says, yeah, because your sinful nature, your sin heart, that's why we had to do that. That's why God had to allow for divorce, was because he knew they were going to get divorced. And it actually was put in there to protect women. So they couldn't just be divorced for willy-nilly. So it looks very like anti-women, but it actually was there for a protection. I never thought about it that way. So notice it says it was the man that divorced the wife, not the wife who divorced the husband, because the women in Israel did not have that right, although the Roman women did. The official bill of divorcement was given to the wife. How devastating. We call it being served papers, to declare her status and to assure any prospective husband that she was indeed free to remarry, because God's going to want her to be able to be supported. Okay. So this was to say, kind of like, she's available. So it wasn't as slamming as it kind of sounds, right? Because obviously women were being divorced for just the dumbest reasons, which divorce happens today for the dumbest reasons, both male and female. Oh, I thought I lost my earrings. Anyway, okay, where was I? Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Apart from the giving of this document, this bill of divorcement, the only other requirement was that the woman would not return to her first husband if her second husband divorced her. So she couldn't go back to her first husband if her second husband divorced her. So among the Jews, the question was not, may a divorced woman marry again? Because remarriage was permitted and even expected, because she's got to get supported. She's got to be taken care of. The big question was, what are the legal grounds for a man to divorce his wife? Now, this is something I never thought about before. Jeff and I both were talking about it in our studies. Kind of studies, not really. That makes it sound like we're really scholarly. We weren't. We're listening to something. But anyway, like I said, I haven't finished studying this. But you're like, what about if there had been adultery? Why didn't God address if adultery happened in the marriage, there could be a divorce? Why do you think he didn't address that? Because they'd be dead. They'd be dead. I'm talking about this right here. Right here. He doesn't address it. And they didn't address it in 24, Deuteronomy 24, I don't think. Because he's going to address other situations, but whatever Moses meant by the some uncleanness couldn't have been adultery if on this line of reasoning, because there would have been no need to get a divorce because she would have already been stoned to death. So that's why they would now without the bill of divorcement, she would have been kind of just left to flounder in society. Maybe um regarded lowly, like maybe people would look down upon her or something. So by giving this commandment to Israel, God was not putting this was not him putting his stamp of approval on marriage. And it was not him encouraging, I mean on divorce, and him not encouraging it. I think because we talk about how God inhabits eternity. He knows what we're going to do. He knows we're sinful. He knows we're always going to do some dumb things and stray, especially when it comes to marriages, because that's really, you're very vulnerable when you're married to someone. They know, all this stuff about you, and having sex involved is very vulnerable and everything. So he was just, I think God was just trying to do this so that it would make it really, really difficult for a man to just divorce his wife easily. So that's why divorce today is just, we hear it so much, and we have no fault divorce and in some states, and we have this and that. And so maybe we're a little desensitized to this topic of divorce. I don't know. I don't think everybody is, because going through a divorce is horrible. Um, so he's just doing that so the wives could not become victims. And I think that I would, like I said, I think the one school of thought of Rabbi S would make more sense, because some uncleanness, if it was legit adultery, then she would have been stoned to death. And so, anyway, that's just my thoughts on that one. Now, that would bring us up to verse 5, and then verse 6 in Mark 10. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And we're like, wait, we're going back to the basics here. And that's a good thing. I think it's a good response when you're dealing with people who need to hear the basics to go over them again. And also, I think this is just my opinion. He knew the Pharisees didn't care what he was saying. They're just looking for something. So I don't think he was, but he has a crowd of people around him. So he's going to make it a teachable moment, in my opinion. And he's going to say, but from the beginning of the creation, God made the male and female. He's defining marriage for us. And that marriage definition is still true today. It doesn't get changed because of years of time passing or different cultures. This is God's word, which stays the same as yesterday, today, and forever. And he says male and female. So that's really important, because if you're a female, you can be a wife. And if you're a male, you can be a husband. And you're like, why are you saying that? That's obvious, because that's why we believe women can't preach, because it says the person who's preaching has to be the husband of one wife. So how's that a chick? How's that a girl? You know? So that's why I'm making that point. And that goes against I know some people who may be watching my page. I know you believe otherwise, not trying to upset anyone. I am going by what the Bible says. I believe women should not be preachers, elders, deacons, bishops, whatever you want to call. I don't think they should be any of those. And people want to talk about, well, women should be quiet in church. That verse is about speaking in tongues. It is not about women being quiet. Okay. So, anyway, if I made anybody upset, super not trying to make people upset. So, not trying to make people upset. All right. So, let's go back. So, in verses 6 through 9, he's just going over the basics about how you leave your parents, right? And you cleave to your wife. That cleave is so important. And now, okay, so Jeff and I got married. Had been adults for a while. He was 37. I was about to turn 30. Okay, he says he was 36. He turned 37 3 days after our wedding. Okay. But and neither one of us had been married before. Jeff had never really had dated before. And so cleaving was not hard for us. We'd already left our families. We'd been independent. Now cleaving was hard for us in the fact that we'd both been head of the household for a while. And that coming together was a little rambunctious and caused some, and we had a child involved because I was already an unwed mom. I had been. So when you have a child involved, that's one of the major things you argue about is children and finances, right? So, and it was a rough first year, but we knew God was going to get us through it and everything. And it had a lot of good times too, a lot of good times. But we got to cleave. Now I'm on this end of my life, this part of my life. This is where I have to remember, okay, you remember how easy it was for you to cleave because your parents butted out? So when your children, Julia, you got to butt out. We have to remind ourselves as adults, parents of adult children, don't put your nose in their marriage, and you're like, hey, none of your kids are married. I know. And I don't even know if they will be. I really think Jesus is going to come back. Anyway, but I know I'm going to make a note to totally butt out.
It's hard.
It is hard. It is hard. It's hard to butt out of their career decisions and everything, but you have to. We have to. So, for those who have kids that haven't left the home yet, just hear us. It is hard to let them watch them make choices that you're wondering, how can I save them if that falls through? And you can't. That's the hard part. So,
We as adults, we survived.
we did.
We
We survived so much more than we forget our kids go through, right? Like we're rocking like 18 jobs and but no, you need time to rest. And I'm like, what am I doing? I was working from like 6 a.m. to going to college and doing this. Anyway, but we do because we love them. We don't want them to have a hard time because we just don't want that, right? So now here's the thing. I do my note to me and was that whosoever no what therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Don't let man tear it apart. And I had to say, and Julia, don't be that man. Because we can tear apart our own marriages. Yes, ma'am.
That verse where God put you together,
Uh-huh.
does that mean every marriage that ever happened, God put you together?
So, this is how I'm going to interpret it. If you went through the process of getting married in the eyes of God, then he's saying, I'm not saying he's signing off on who you chose, but he's saying, okay, now that you're married, you're joined together. Because I I'm saying that because we know he said don't be unequally yoked, right? And we know people get unequally yoked sometimes. And so I don't think God puts a stamp of approval of that. But now that you're married, that you chose him, you're joined together, honor it and fulfill it. So that's what I believe. I haven't studied that. So I'm going to put that disclaimer there. but that's how I interpret it. And then you become one flesh, twain, one flesh. I think what happened is I became more twain and Jeff stayed skinny. I think I just went this way. But anyway, but yeah. So the thing I have to I'm just right now, it's a season in my life. I'm struggling with like intrusive thoughts and not just that, but just like some weirdo things. I'm like, you can let that destroy your marriage if you don't rein those in. And so that's kind of why that spoke to me today, was like when I was gathering my notes and stuff, like that's you. And so I was like, oh, and I put, don't let me be the man that put asunder. So okay, and now verses 10 through 12. 10 I never picked up on. I never picked up on. 10 says, and in the house his disciples asked him again of the same matter. So all that before verse 10 was him dealing with the Pharisees and the crowd. But now that they're secluded and in their privacy, he's going to give them more information. He didn't want to, I'm thinking he didn't want to do it in front of the Pharisees. They're going to twist everything he says, most likely, and just start a riot about something. So he reserved his, like, I'll just tell them more. And I thought, I need to remember that sometimes it's time to just like in Hamilton, talk less, smile more, or whatever he says. What does he say? Stop, don't talk so much, tell all your business. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking pretty prevalent because they had to make a provision for it, even back in the wilderness. I'm not so I'm thinking it was pretty prevalent. So we tend to think that we're just really, really bad in this time period, but go back in the Bible. Look how bad Sodom was. Look how bad it was that God had to flood the earth. So I would think that it was pretty prevalent. Yeah. So that's a good question because I do tend to think about everything in the days of old are better and leave it to Beaver and all that other stuff. And there was junk back then, and it's actually disheartening because I want to kind of still have that little comforting thought, and then some things have gotten worse. Like I walked home in a foreign country from school over a mile as a 5-year-old, and no one would ever dream of doing that. Oh, I hope no one would ever have a 5-year-old doing that today. But back then it was okay. So there are some things that have, I think, gotten worse, or maybe they ebb and flow through the Earth's history. But that was a really good question. I think it was just such a mess that he's like, okay, I got to do something for these people because, well, Um, but in the marriage relationship, we know, of course, is sacred and intimate. And Matthew 19, let's go to Matthew 19. So Matthew 19 gives some more detail. Now, remember, Mark is kind of more of a concise snapshot of things. And one person I was studying, he was saying how, Matthew was a tax collector, right? So that meant he would have had legal training and they did shorthand to do notes. So that some people have suggested that maybe some of the reason why now Luke has the most detail. You're like, oh my word, Luke, but I think Matthew added more detail because he could write down stuff very quickly, a lot of stuff very quickly because apparently he knew shorthand or some kind of version. Don't hold that as a gospel. That's just a theory. But in Matthew 19, it also gives the same. This is the same thing that we just read in Mark. Okay, so they're in the same location. It's the same time, but you can see from 1 through 12, he gives more information. Okay, and verse 9 does show he gives a provision. And because in verse 9 it says, and I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which put away doth commit adultery. Now, this is where it's starting to be like, this is really getting confusing. So, to remarry after divorce, other than one granted on the grounds of fornication. I always say fornication. I think that's a street name in Jackson, Mississippi, and that's why it was. Okay. Would make the person guilty of committing adultery, and this is a serious thing, of course. But notice here, the woman is also mentioned. Wait. No, never mind. So this is saying there is an exception for divorce if there be fornication. Now, I was like, well, what? Wait, how can you have fornication in a marriage? Because in my understanding of the words today, fornication was sin that was before marriage, and adultery was sexual sin after marriage. So I was getting kind of confused about that. But fornication can just be impurity and sin, and so I'm still not real sure exactly what cases would there be fornication, but not the death penalty. So, and I don't really want to know all the exact instances, because then it puts stuff in your head about sex stuff. So, um, let me make sure I'm following the notes there. They were disgusting. Yeah. hmm Well, and idolatry was kind of like fornication. You know what I'm saying? So, but some what? No, 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 no. Okay, so let me just try to follow my notes, because when Jesus brings the conversation from grounds for divorce to adultery, he swings the subject from scribal tradition to one of the Ten Commandments, which we talked about. We know it's like in Exodus is like, thou shalt not commit adultery. The situation is more serious than the Pharisees and disciples let themselves believe. It hadn't occurred to them that a man could commit adultery against his wife. This is the new teaching. Now, back then, the men knew they could commit adultery against her husband. This is how women were viewed, but they never dreamed that they could commit adultery against his own wife. That's how they viewed it. Isn't that crazy? So what I'm saying is, the men, if they committed adultery, it was only adultery to them if the woman they slept with was married to someone else. If they had sex with a prostitute or any other woman and she wasn't married, then they never dreamed that they had committed adultery against their own wife. So the women of us today were like, oh, no. We'd be like, oh, cuss word, no, but that's how it was. So this is like, wait, what? So this is why, the things of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, people sometimes make it sound like that God is, misogynist, but he's not. He's actually looking after women. And remember, women are the first ones that Jesus revealed himself to after the tomb. I mean, and women were the ones that picked up on, he's about to be killed and he's going to rise again. The men kept kind of glossing over, Yeah. hmm Well, he said, she's your mom now. Behold, that women were listening, and Mary Magdalene was ministering in the ministry. And then notice in the New Testament, later we find other women that are Paul praises, and not for their own glory, but that their hearts are for the Lord, and they're telling people about the gospel. So when people say, well, the Bible's against women, let them know there are things that look like it's misogynist, but if you dig into it, it was the culture of the time that was being misogynistic, not the Lord. Okay. So it was the culture of the time that was treating women like property and treating them like this and that. But God was like, no, you're supposed to honor your wife. Okay. And that's why I gave her to you, stuff like that. So, that was so freeing for me, because of my generation. My generation was the first generation to kind of be the children of the first feminist. Okay. So a lot of our teachings in daycare, I didn't go to daycare, but a lot of my people my age were some of the first generations in daycare, not the first, but one of the first. And so things where we were taught woman power and this and that, man is bad, a man's doing everything wrong. And so a lot of that influenced and colored my thinking of the Bible's teachings as when I was a younger person, like 2 days ago. No, sure. Now, when I was a younger Christian, it did influence my thinking, and then I had to get myself out of cultural thinking and into what the Word of God says. So they had to do that back then. We have to do that now, and our culture is in our face, and it's very opposite of it's a paradox of what the Bible teaches. In fact, when we finish chapter 10, I want to talk about the different paradoxes that are in this chapter, and I need to finish up. Okay, so In the Mosaic law, a man could only commit adultery against the husband of the woman he slept with if she were married. And that's in Leviticus 20:10. We're not going to go there. In simple terms, per the Jewish worldview, only a man could be the victim of adultery. So women just had to suck it up and deal with it. Jesus, as he does so often, raises the status of women to fully human. So that you can find in 1 Corinthians 7, which gives a little more information. So this would have been Paul writing. And Paul would have been divorced, unless we have proof of his wife dying. Because to be a Pharisee, he would have had to been married. We tend to not think about that, huh? Right? So guess what? You can not have a wife and minister the gospel. You just can't be a chick. Okay. So 1 Corinthians 7:4. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. So back then, now that we've learned what we've learned, think about how what that would have been for people to hear. Wait, she has power over my body too. What? We have to be in a team, in a partnership of what we do with our bodies. What? So we get used to that. We're in our culture, this would have never, So now with this lens on my eyes, I'm like, oh, that would have been like, I bet that did cause some people to go, oh, he can't mean what he just said. No. So who knows? And we do that too when we hear something we don't really want to answer to, like, oh, I don't think he meant that. But oh, sorry. Sorry, that was unattractive. Okay, back to Mark 10. We're gonna finish up. What I love is that he raises the status of women, but also with that raising of our status, we're also accountable too. Okay, we can't just act like however we want because now our status has been raised. But it's also saying we're equally accountable too. If we commit adultery, we're in the wrong. Now, obviously, adultery is not a death sentence anymore. And then some people also bring up the case of Jesus and when they bring the adulterous woman before him. So I don't know if we have time to cover that, but let me just kind of give you a little snapshot of that. So you know that they find her in the act and bring her to him. Oh, that's convenient. Pretty sure that was staged. And where's the dude? Where's the dude she was with? Pretty sure that was a setup so they could trap Jesus and this poor woman just collateral damage. How horrible. And Jesus hated that. And people are like, what did he write in the sand? Remember, he knelt in the sand instead of answering him? I can tell you what he wrote. Words of conviction. Whatever he wrote in that sand was so convicting that they started dropping the rocks and walking off and leaving. And we don't really need to know what he wrote exactly. Because if I were in that group, I sure wouldn't want Jesus writing all my bad behavior business out for the world to see. So I really don't know yet. I don't really know exactly what he wrote, but I do know whatever it was words of conviction that got them to drop those rocks because they were bent on just killing that woman, and that's God. And they're like, well, that means he defied the punishment of adultery because that's a death penalty. No, he didn't defy it. He took it for her. He paid for it on the cross. And he paid for it for us too. So people think it means he's just erasing the Old Testament. No, remember he said he came to fulfill it. That also means he came to pay it. Okay, he came to pay it. And when I thought about that in those terms, I'd never thought about that scene before like that. I never thought about I never thought he did anything wrong, of course. But I was like, why didn't he? Why didn't they stone her? And blah, 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 this and that. First of all, it was a setup. But I was like, no, wait a minute. She did have a death penalty, but he paid for it. So later in this chapter, we're going to talk about God's grace and we're going to talk about the rich young man. I'm going to put a disclaimer before that one too. I'm going to probably say something that upsets people online, but that refutes a really prominent teaching, in my opinion. But so online folks, thank you for joining us. We're going to collect some prayer and praises. And if you have any would you please send them to me? You can send them privately or you can text them to me, 801-807-8819. I don't care if my phone number's on the internet because I teach foreigners. It's all over the place. So, and you can email me, wordjules@gmail.com. Oh, Janae, I'm glad you felt good enough to come. Are you all hivey? You all full of hives? Ooh, more Benadryl. All right, take care.